very good afternoon to all of you. My name is Mohammad Imtiaz. Currently, I'm a doctoral candidate at the Department of Political Science, Jamia Millia Islamia University, New Delhi. It's always been an honor to be a part of In Dialogue as a student and now as a volunteer. It always gives me immense pleasure to be at this platform, which is actually trying to inculcate all sort of humanistic belief and ideas that is much needed at this time of crisis. Today, we have invited Muhammad Danish Iqbal, who is a well-known person and teaches English at Aligarh Muslim University. Muhammad Danish Iqbal is an assistant professor at the Department of English, Aligarh Muslim University. His area of interest include literary theory, intersections between literature and history, or secularism as well. So the topic we have chosen today, and Dialogue has decided to talk on, it's like on reading and subjectivity, which has become one of the most important thing to understand at the time of crisis that the world is facing, either it's in terms of our own nation or throughout the world. The creation of subjectivity has got too much entrenched that this topic has become of high relevance. So for that, I would like to invite Danish sir, that he could enlighten us with his important ideas that he have already been an expert on. So over to you, Danish sir. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Imtiaz, for your very kind introduction and maybe slightly unduly, called as someone who is well known. I'm not, and I don't think I want to be well known either. Anyway, so I think this is for all of us our second meeting in the consecutive week, and I'm meeting you for two reasons. I in fact requested our friend Bazad to explore the possibility of this meeting, and he was again kind enough to have agreed to that. Because I think during the course of our conversation last week, those of you who might have attended, we were trying to understand and explore as to how does the act of reading bring into focus a certain activity, which is not only a mode of access or making meaning, but also a site for certain, which I kind of termed as a certain distinct form of self-fashioning. So as we kind of went on to talk about it, we also found out that most of our discussion more or less remained around the two poles of reading, particularly literary, had initially remarked to be simultaneously a social enterprise as well as a collective or a social enterprise. So I think even as we fruitfully, in fact, I got to hear from all of you, there remained, to my mind, a better way of, presenting to you some of the ideas I'm trying to work with. So it is not a fully formed idea, but I hope through our conversations, two conversations put together, you'll form a better view of the subject, and hopefully we'll have something more material and fruitful to add to this concern, which should in turn also inform our view of what it means to be in dialogue. Right? What does dialogue do? What does dialogue do to both nodes of the dialogue? If at any point my video is, particularly my audio, video you can probably ignore momentarily, but if the audio is choppy or not too clear, you may type out a message, because that will alert me, in fact. Anyway, so moving on, in order to take forward the conversation that began last week, I had also forwarded two poems, and which I hope all of you must have read today. So I will try and make some of my ideas little more clearly evident to you with the help of those poems. Uh, the poem, we'll come to the poem in a bit, but I hope it's available to all of you. And if the need be, you can have it by you. But before coming to the poems, let me, bring to the center stage the topic itself, that is reading and subjectivity. Now, some of you may already be familiar with how, with the emergence of critical theory and theoretical interventions from various disciplines, particularly in the domain of humanities and social sciences, we have gradually moved from taking the idea of the entity or figure of an individual as a figure that is complete, finite, and fully comprehensible entity to something that we have come to call a subject, right? So let's have some conceptual clarity around that. What is this individual? What is this self? And how we have, in fact, come to also. There's some disturbance in the background. If someone incidentally unmuted themselves, yeah. So then we have the emergence of this figure called subject in place of self and individual, right? So subject is the name or the word that we use when we are still talking about that I, the figure I. But we are talking about it with a different kind of awareness. So what is the difference in this awareness of I, which we try to convey or work with or bring to any discussion when we use subject, the concept of subjectivity, right? And that's where it comes from, the subject. So the subject is, let's think about it like this, that when we invoke the term I, we're once again talking about our own, what we take to be our own individual, very particular subjective experiences, feelings, as a consequence of actions, participations, etc. Right? But at the same time, when there are multiple I's, all of us are using this word I. So there is something which brings together, what we take to be a particular experience, but also that can only be articulated through this pronoun, which is singular and yet a distinct position available to everyone. Okay? But is it independent? Is the figure of I independent, as in, is it fully autonomous? So the contemporary scholarship in humanities and social sciences are very, one of the dominant ways of looking at it is that no, post-Cartesian view of the self is not sustainable. It's been very heavily challenged in 20th century. I don't want to go into the history of subject, but I just want to clarify what I mean by subjectivity, okay, before I move on to read the poem or explore it with you. And so what is it? So subject is always this I, this speaking I, this feeling, doing I, this thinking I. It is always a subject of something or subject to something. So this I is always in a state of, that is subject of focus. Maybe, for example, the figure of a patient is always a subject of the medical sciences, right? It is the figure of, for example, in the current situation, we already have a very particular detailed subject position, which would help us identify that who is a COVID patient or who is likely to be a COVID patient. And in the emergence of this figure, there is all kinds of knowledge which takes upon itself the focus or takes into its focus that figure, and hence that figure is subject of that knowledge formation. So that is the of part. At the same time, it is also to. So the subject will always be regulated by the knowledge that is available to us as part of that formation, which we call medical sciences, etc. Right? I hope I'm clear so far. Now, secondly, think about grammar. When you use the word I, it is already subject to some of the grammatical rules, right? And it is the grammatical rules that also determine as to where it should appear, right, in the sentence. So in that sense, we can say that its position is also determined by some of the other formations around, right? Similarly, you can think of subject as a legal subject. All of us are citizens of this country, and as a political subject, we are obligated towards the constitution and the rules and framework that are in place, right? Then we have something called a philosophical subject, like in the tradition of philosophy, how some of you would be familiar with people like Kant and others writing in the modern period of modern philosophy, as we call it. That I is at the heart of their philosophical investigation as the source of knowledge, as the ground for the analysis of truth and knowledge, right? And in the last analysis, now this is where it gets more interesting. The subject is also the individual self, which could be more than any of that, which could be in excess, radical excess of any of that, right? And it is always in a state of formation that we always keep contesting, and any of these demarcations that I have said earlier, and we also try to break free of that. Sometimes we proclaim more than that it allows us to say. And in that sense, it is always a sense in a state of formation. For example, take the example of citizenship or a democratic citizen. So it is always in a state of formation, right? It's not as if it's already fully formed, etc. Right? It's always in a state of formation. Anyhow, so these are some of the ways in which I'm just trying to make you understand as to what does subjectivity mean. So when we read or engage with a literary text, in this case, the poems that I'm trying to use as an aid to our discussion, I'll hopefully also, with the help of your insights into your own reading of the poem, hopefully kind of demonstrate what I was trying to say last week. That how, to my mind, as I have read the poems, it also enacts what I was trying to say, right? So I'll take about 3:15 by my watch, so I'll take about 10 minutes more and talk about a very popular essay that was written in 1974, which is, I have not given a copy because I decided against it because I was not sure that how much of an interest will it hold to you. But if after discussion you do feel that you would like to read for yourself, I'll of course give you a copy. And these days, none of us is at the mercy of others to find a copy. So I'll give you the information so you can, of course, find it for yourself. So this is an essay by a philosopher, an American philosopher, Thomas Nagel. Thomas Nagel wrote this very powerful and very, became very a huge point of discussion in 1974. The title of the essay is, "What is it like to be a bat?" BAT. What is it like to be a bat? right? A very provocatively titled essay, and written in the analytical tradition, but I don't think that information is necessary, because in itself the essay is eminently readable. You don't have to be a student of professionally a student of philosophy, so to speak. Moreover, I was also reminded of one of the participants in the last week when we met last week, Zishan, I think. He had brought up the question of solipsism following the conversation we had. So I also thought that it would relate rather more directly to some of the concerns that he had raised, a very useful concern, I would say. So what is the heart of the essay here? To tell you the truth, it's a title in the form of a question. So I'm going to give you a very quick summary and then just take out what I find useful for our discussion. All right. Much to our disappointment, Nagel is not telling us what does it mean to be like a bat. It's not about a bat. It is about a bat, but it is not as if once you read the essay, you will know what a bat feels like about itself. Quite on the contrary, what Nagel is trying to do here, he is, of course, addressing this long-standing philosophical debate that goes by the name of mind-body problem, and the problem of consciousness. So it is the idea of consciousness that brought me to mention this essay here. So are we all about our minds? That is ideas, that is in the tradition of idealism. Is it as if everything that is around us is available to us only in the form of ideas, in the form of concepts, right? So it's only in the form of concepts that we participate, right? Or materialism. Is everything a subject to physical process, right? So this was the the 2 points of view that he was trying to address through this essay. And he says that consciousness is at the heart of this mind-body problem. That is, can we actually determine through verification of certain physical processes, for example, that what is subjective experience, right? And that's why he uses this wild kind of an analogy as to, despite having found everything about what possibly a bat feels like when it is, randomly flying about, using its sonar and echolocation and all kinds of, bodily mechanisms to navigate, we still, does it feel, or what is it? Can we still know? Know is the important one. Can we still know what is it to be like a bat? And this is what he calls the subjective experience. In the subjective experience, he's saying that it is. We can all, of course, imagine. We can, of course, I don't want to use the word guess, but we can, of course, through our familiar concepts, try to think as to what does it mean to be like a bat, right? Yeah. So, and it is this phrase, what is it like to be, which he calls consciousness. What is it like, right? And it is this like to be to oneself, as in our own lives. We have certain, we are aware being, that's what consciousness is, right? And we are aware of ourselves. We are also witness to our own feelings. We are also witness to our own thoughts, whatever you want to call it, right? And experiences. So this question of subjective experience is what Nagel is saying is virtually inaccessible to those who are not that who do not share in that consciousness, right? So what possibilities do we have at all? Now, he's saying that there is something called, of course, this essay has been debated, discussed to the end of the world. I mean, but he, towards the end, he's only projecting as to how we can break through this impossibility. He's saying that, of course, and let me add that maybe this essay is more useful to those who are working, and those who read literature or think through the paradigms of humanities than it is possibly to the philosophers and those who are with mind-body problem. What he says is through the surfeit of imagination, metaphors, and feelings, and the language that is familiar to one, that can be enriched through this endeavor, right? So, on the face of it, if you read it, it may seem like it's a regular thing to say that you can't be the other person. Of course, you can't be common parlance, when you say, what is it like to be an American? So you'd possibly hope that you are trying to convey that what is it like for you, that for an American to be an American. But what you're essentially saying is, what is it like for you to be an American? That is, how can you, while remaining as you, think about what it means to be an American? You understand what I'm saying? So there is this gap, and he is making his arguments, kind of situating them in that knowledge gap. So he's, of course, of the view that beings have certain essences. The subjective experience is coming from a very essential consciousness, and it is only possible for us to, it is virtually impossible for us to know what it means to be in that, or what it means to experience that subjective experience. At best, we can only, out of curiosity, out of a need, we can try and get there through the means available to us. That is our own imagination, our own framework, etc. So that I'm mentioning this, this article just in a very limited sense. I'm using it just to kind of establish at the very outset that if one is of the view that we cannot know, right, then that which we are trying to get. Hello? Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Thank you. Thank you. So if we cannot get to the consciousness of the subjective experience of the other, then so of course we can be in a dialogue. We're not saying that the failure of knowledge doesn't mean that you cannot be a participant into that. Okay, let me just put it like that. And I think it also honors the idea of difference. And at the same time, as a philosophical and political implication, it also tells us that if you do want to have a measure of that other subjective experience, then you should allow that other subjective experience to be itself, rather than rather than deny its existence simply because you cannot be the knowing subject. Are you getting my point? So, in self and other is, oriented and geared towards bringing out this very violence of the pursuit of the other, right? So here in this essay, I found that he's not saying any of this, that since this, so that. I'm just trying to flag the implication of such a formulation, that what we can take from it. And having said that, let me come back to the 2 points, right? Do all of you have a copy of that poem with you? Can you readily refer to it if I were to read out and refer to certain lines and stanzas?
One can actually write in the chat box, and then if they're not being able to unmute themselves, I'll let them be. So please, if you want to say something, either write in the chat box or you are invited directly to speak. There's no problem.
I'll first request you to look at this poem which I had attached, a copy of the poem. It's called Conversation with a Stone, right? Here, I don't actually teach poetry to my students. I normally take classes on fiction and interdisciplinary studies like cultural studies, etc. But I have always found this poet very fascinating. First of all, for the reason, I'm sorry, I haven't mentioned her. It's a poem by Polish poet, post-war Polish poet, Wisława Szymborska. It's a little difficult to, pronounce our names maybe to our Indianized tongues. So, but normally I've heard people call her Wisława Szymborska. She is also a Nobel laureate. She won this Nobel Prize in Literature in the year 1996. And this particular poem is one of her most, I would say, very commonly anthologized poems, called Conversation with the Stone. And I think it came out in 60s, if I'm not wrong. And the other poem, it came out a little later, View with a Grain of Sand. Both these poems, if you would have read, as is the case in her other poem, they tell you something about not only about the identity of the speaker, but also about what is the addressee doing to that speaker. One. Secondly, it also tells you about the limits or the fringes of the makeup of our knowledge. That is, what is the at the end of the day, what is it that our knowledge is made up of, right? So she's working at the edges of that structure, I would say. And here, in certain stanzas, you will find that she's explicitly referring to language or being or certain gestures, the idea of the point of view, and a very rich play of irony in her works. These two are my favorite poems, particularly View with a Grain of Sand. But for our purposes, I think Conversation with the Stone fits the bill perfectly. And what I have found, I'll share my reading with you, and then I'll also invite you to, come up with your responses. Is as you go on to read, and as the session is on reading and subjectivity, this poem very radically mirrors the position from which you're reading, and does its best, I would say, to take you to the consciousness of the other without necessarily prevailing over the other, right? Which is a very difficult task to accomplish, because we, at the end of the day, as Nagel is also telling us, you cannot have a fuller understanding of the knowing subjective experience from your own subjective position, right? And what she is trying to do is how, through certain acts of language, we establish a relationship between oneself and the other. And it is through that, I would say, through a very wonderful reflection on that relationship, that Shimboska is also pushing us to, in fact, you know, revisit our idea of self and the other, and what kind of what kind of reconfiguration is it that she is inviting us to perform. In the first instance, what I would like to suggest is that if you read this poem, you would find that in both the poems, actually, I would say this for both the poems, that you'll always find that distance, between the speaking subject and the addressee, right? So the one that is being addressed and the one that is speaking. And of course, the speaking subject, a poem is not possible without a speaking subject. There has to be someone speaking, right? There's a speaker in the poem, as we say, as against narrator. So that's how I'm using the word speaking and speaker. The second thing that you'll, of course, observe, and if you disagree with what I'm saying, please do, bring it up later on. You'll also find that the speaker, not she, the speaker in the poem is just about hovering on the edges of that relationship. It never gets to be intimate with the consciousness of the other, right? So there is a gap, there's a distance, and we are finding the realization of this relationship merely by a very, I would say, concerted way in which the edges of the relationship is being reflected upon or celebrated. Now, that is one way of understanding the relationship, or one way of throwing light on the knotty issue that Nagel has pointed out. That instead of thinking about the other as this absolute other and self as this insulated self, can we reconfigure the relationship between the self and other as one of a creative relationship, which doesn't necessarily have to be a relationship of sympathy or empathy, because sympathetic or empathetic approach always tries to evacuate the other of its otherness, right? So, which is actually not possible following the framework that Nagel is giving us. So, if that is an impossible task, and we cannot deny the existence of something which we do not know, for example, right? So, if we cannot know the subjective experience of the other, do we also have the right to deny that it is there? We cannot, right? So, this creative relationship is what you find here, that the self is and the other is coming to realize itself in a very lyrical, poetic, creative relationship between the self and the other in the poem. So I will give it a quick reading, maybe. Or is there anyone who would like to do that voluntarily? It's not a class, but if there's someone who was completely taken in by the poem and wants to, no? Okay. Yes, do we have a volunteer? No. No? All right. So let's give it a quick look here. It says, conversation with the stone. I knock on the stone's door. It's me. Let me in. I want to come inside, look all around, breathe you in. Go away, says the stone. I'm tightly closed. Even broken to bits, we would be closed, tight. Even ground to sand, we would admit no one. I knock on the stone's door. It is me. Let me in. I come out of pure curiosity. I can only do it this side of death. I intend to wander through your palace, then return to the leaf and the water drop. My time is short. Surely my mortality touches you. I am stone, says the stone, and must therefore remain grave. Go away from her. Fleshly laughter is beyond me. I knock on the stone's door. It is me, let me in. I have heard of your vast empty halls, unseen, barrenly beautiful, earless, echoless, untrodden. Admit, even you know little of this. Vast empty halls, says the stone, but there is no room in them. Beautiful they may be, but alien to your beggarly senses. You may recognize me, but experience me never. I mean, this is a very clear articulation of what I'm trying to say. My whole surface lies towards you. My whole interior is turned away. I knock on the stone's door. It is me. Let me in. I don't seek sanctuary for all eternity. I'm not unhappy, not shelterless. My world is worth returning to. I will enter, leave empty handed. The only proof that I was there truly will be words, and who will believe them? You will not enter, says the stone. You have no concept of stoniness. All your makeshifts are futile. Even sharpened eyes, X-ray eyes, what use are they faced with my otherness? You will not enter. You have intentions merely, shadow sketches, feeble imaginings. I knock on the stone's door. It is me. Let me in. I cannot wait 2,000 ages to come under your roof. If you don't believe me, says the stone, turn to the leaf. It will tell my story. The water drop will say the same. I laugh. I'm exploding with laughter, colossal laughter, although I cannot laugh. I knock on the stone's door. It is me. Let me in. I have no door. Stone. Right. So, a very powerful exposition of so many things. You can read it in so many ways. You can read it as the story of the 20th century horrors of war, of the 200 years of colonialism, of the empire destruction, and the lures of friendship, the lures of loyalty, the lures of knowing, of knowledge, right? It is rife with all kinds of readings, but I leave it to you to read it the way you wish to. But one thing that I want to, mention here with regards to this poem is this beautiful use of irony. And the ironic relationship between self and other is a very fruitful way of, enacting our relationship through reading. Right. So, what do I mean by irony here? Look at how, through this purported interaction, both the speaker and the stone, they are undergoing a certain transformation. Right. A stone that is not supposed to speak, not supposed to talk, is not supposed to respond like the way we know. What is this stoniness? Right? So the speaker is knocking because particularly because it's a stone. Right? And the stone is radically the speaker's idea of stoniness. That even if you crush me, you ground me to sand and powder and dust, even then you won't get to be inside me, right? And the stone that is not supposed to laugh, knows how to use laughter, to waste away the attempts made by the speaker. The stone is also trying to deny the privilege of the speaker, that the speaker proclaims over the stone that let me breathe my fill. What does that mean? That you let me be inside you. Let me take that which is maybe mine in your existence. That your mind, the knowledge of you that is due to me, right? And that is also denied. And a very beautiful imagery here, that my outward surface is towards you, right? But my interiority, that is, in other words, the subjective experience, is only available to me. It's facing away from you, right? So how is that crossing over possible, right? And it ends on the note that I have no door, right? What could that mean? I have no door, right? So that means I am radically other from you. I have no entry to offer, right? But the poem was also enacting a conversation while both of them remain in their own respective positions, and yet, make this conversation possible, make this dialogic relationship possible, right? Will you just give me a second? I'll be back in a second. Okay.
Sure.
Give me
sure.
Yeah. So let's also look at the point where there are these repeated insistence. Am I audible? Hello.
Yes, sir. You're audible. Please go on.
Okay, thank you. Right. And it throws everything as something as fundamental to human existence as mortality, right? If you would have read Shakespeare, one point where sisters says smells of mortality, that is, I don't have, my time is short, and surely my mortality touches you. I'm stone, says the stone, and must therefore remain grey. Look at the play on the word grey. Stones, of course, prevail over human life, but they're also grey. They're supposed to look grey. That is, stone-faced, stone-hearted. Think about these metaphors that we use, and stone-headed. We say that in order to refer to someone who is, not amenable to certain ways of being. Anyway, so what I'm trying to tell you is that this poem, in a sense, brings out the idea of how reading as a site of interaction for us as readers here, it makes us evident certain ways in which two radically different entities, where a speaking self and the addressed other, they can remain as they are. It's a futile poem. The beauty of the poem is that it is futile, and yet it accomplishes something, right? So it's futile at one level, but very deeply accomplishing at another, right? So it is futile because it does not result in what it aspires to, and at the same time, it is also accomplishing the very possibility of fashioning both the entities as they are, and yet, be intersubjective. That is, to share in each other's subjectivity. Similarly, let me also look at the poem Just give me a second. Yes. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes. Right. So let's very quickly go through the other poem, and then let's put it together and have let's gain some more insight into this possibility. It's called View with a Grain of Sand. We call it a grain of sand, but it calls itself neither grain nor sand. It does just fine without a name, whether general, particular, permanent, passing, incorrect, or apt. Our glance, our touch means nothing to it. It doesn't feel itself seen and touched, and it fell on the windowsill is only our experience, not its. For it is not different from falling on anything else, with no assurance that it has finished falling or that it is falling still. The window has a worldview of a lake, but the view does not view itself. It exists in this world, colorless, shapeless, soundless, odorless, and painless. The lake's flow exists flowlessly, and its shore exists shorelessly. And the water itself neither wet nor dry, and its waves to themselves are neither singular nor plural. They splash deaf to their own noise on pebbles neither large nor small. And all this beneath a sky by nature skyless, in which the sun sets without setting at all, and hides without hiding behind an unminding cloud. The wind ruffles it, its only reason being that it blows. A second passes, a second, a third, but they are 3 seconds only for us. Time has passed like courier with urgent news, but that's just our simile. The character is inverted, his haste is make believe, his news inhuman. Now, she completely dismantles all the structures of knowledge with which human beings work, right? Language, source of meaning, shape, order, science, all kinds of positive knowledge, right? Color, shape, sound, order. Pain as one of the most human things to be here, that is to experience pain. And she in a sense, she effectively demonstrates to us as to how in one move, all the claims to objectivity, all the claims to an uncontestable truth about the world around us come under scrutiny if the perspectives were to be changed, right? And how it could be rendered meaningless. Now, on the face of it, it might read like an attack only on anthropomorphism or all kinds of knowledge that is produced with the human at the center of the world. But at a deeper level, it is also, performing something, I would say, dialogical, right? That how, in order to participate in this dialogic relationship, an intense self-awareness, that is the awareness of the addressing self, right? That at the very least can honor the otherness of the other, right? So when we are faced with the other, we should also be aware that we run the risk of being meaningless, right? And how knowledge can be specific. So if you put the 2 poems together, you will find that in one of this poem particularly, it exposes the limits of our knowledge, the language that we work with, the positive science that we work with, right? The claim to the knowing subject that we work with. And the other poem then also tells us, to my mind, that how if at all, can we get past it in a very creative and a fruitful manner, right? And it is in this act of reading, right? When we read, we are also, in a sense, we are also participating in this similar, intersubjective relationship, and we are witnessing a possibility where we are working with our subjective experience, and despite using our own familiar experiences, despite being limited experiences to make sense of something which is strange or alien to us, it also presents with us this very a rich possibility of making that conversation possible, right? And reading demonstrates that, to my mind. If you read, you're not merely trying to. You're not only reading is not only limited to try the knowledge about what it is offering. In other words, it's not only about getting into the subjective consciousness, of the other, but it is also it also offers a possibility of transformation that we saw in the conversation with a stone, where the speaker is told very directly that you have no idea about my stoniness, right? And I have no door to offer, and how the participation and inclusion is different from access. There's so many ways in which you can read it. What I mean by last sentence that I said is you can crush it. He's saying that you can crush it. You can ground it to sand, but you may not gain access to its interiority, right? So if it is so insulated, in a sense, what avenues do we have to take part into that enterprise? And this point tells us that it's only through situated conversations, situated participation in this relationship at the edges of that relationship. You don't necessarily have to be into the insides. You can be at the edges of that self-other relationship, and through the mobilization of your resources and by honoring the otherness or the difference of the other, we can possibly get somewhere. We can possibly transform ourselves, in a more meaningful sense. I think I will stop here, and I'm sure that having read the poems, you must have also, I don't know if you felt struck by the poem or not, but you must have gathered something to share with us in terms of the topic that I have chosen to discuss, that is how reading, act of reading, in fact, can possibly act as a site of something more than meaning making. That is, to acquire a transformed subject position or subjectivity, a transformed subjectivity. Okay, thank you. I'll now invite comments, remarks, reflections. All of us are free to think aloud. This is not a session where we should be afraid of thinking aloud. We should experiment with our ideas and thoughts. So let's participate in that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danish sir, for an enlightening talk, and that as we are already open for the discussion, I think we should start with the question in the chat box, which has been posted by Rajan, if I'm not wrong. So if you want, I can read that, or if you want to read it on your own, you can also do that. So We'll do it as per your convenience, and then we will go one by one as per the time limit. So would you like me to read the question?
Yeah, you could do that. Yes.
Okay. So what Rajan asked that I'll just it's been quite long, so I'll just take a few minutes maybe. Of course, the problem of subjectivity is very serious in philosophy, but finding its solution in romantic poem or in other metaphor is also not going to help us resolve this. This is what Plato and Socrates proclaimed through their dialogue. Plato's Republic, Book 10. A problem is that on the one hand, we are giving philosophical turn to this problem and then finding solution in poetry, which can only romanticize or our interpretation. Perhaps we could find more conjunctive solutions for that. Would you like to respond to that, sir?
Well, it's not essentially a question. Rajan has shared a remark, and perhaps is correct. But as someone who reads and thinks about literature, I don't think I will be as dismissive of literary enterprise in enriching our understanding of self and the other, or the coming, or the interface between the two, is not coming together, the interface between the two. It is true. I mean, if Mr. Rajan implies by calling it romanticization is in a way to make light of that encounter, then I would take issue with that. I don't think literary writing as an act of representation is something which is, if not harmless, is something which is inconsequential. No, it is not inconsequential. Right? We have a whole body of writing under the umbrella category called the scholarship on Orientalism. Right? We have a whole body of writing in history which is geared towards understanding how these two distinct subject positions can fashion two very different forms of knowledge, right? And literature has been a site precisely because it has been mistaken for a romanticized view. It's not a romanticized view. Yes, we can take it for an exercise in pleasure, which it does. I don't think that is a wrong view, but that is the only thing it does. That's a wrong view to my mind. And most importantly, why I try to illustrate that problem through this poem is that this poem, in some measure, takes that as, first of all, a fact, and also tries to demonstrate the difficulty of the task at hand. So I don't think Szymborska is in any sense trying to make light of it, or simply saying that, you read a poem and the world will be a better place. Of course, it can be a better place too if everyone reads poems and short stories. It can probably, but of course, literature is not a center for reformation. I can guarantee you that. It's not a center for rehabilitation. It is not a center for correction. It's not. But it certainly is a center for reflection. It's a center of awareness. If you read and you are in trouble, probably reading will tell you how much of a trouble you are in. It may not tell you what exactly is wrong with you and how you can get out of it. I don't subscribe to that view exactly. I also don't subscribe to the view that literature will necessarily make you a sympathetic person or empathetic person. No, I'm not saying that, any of that. All I'm saying is that how a certain form of representation, a certain form of representation of thoughts can take us a little bit forward in this direction. That's all. I'm not offering a solution. Thank you for the remark. Yes.
Rajan, if you would have any further query, you can unmute yourself and speak if you would like to.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I enjoyed your lecture a lot, and especially the problem which you highlighted is very pertinent.
Yes, Rajan.
Very much essential. Actually, the problem is very much analytical. Everyone knows about that. Raising the issue, subjectivity is very analytical. But when we go into the history of philosophy, in the last century, we have seen a dichotomy between continental and analytic philosophy. So when you have raised a analytic problem and then finding a solution in the continental philosophy, which is basically to via literature or poetry and so on. So there would be definitely a methodological problem. Take for instance, when we read Derrida, so he says that there is impossibility of clarity. We can never reach clarity at all. Take for instance, when you propose this poem, the very poem, if anyone would read that, everyone will have a different kind of interpretation. So there would be totally misunderstanding, or to say misapprehension, or infinite number of interpretation. So then there would not be any kind of solution for the problem which you have raised. So when we are raising a problem, then we have to follow the same path which can help us at least to dissolve that problem, that no, it is not raising. So I think that the solution best can be explained in the philosophical realm as well. Emmanuel Levinas proposed a very beautiful solution for that, which you rejected, that by being empathetic or sympathetic, we cannot dissolve this. So when Emmanuel Levinas proposes the thesis that the moment I see a human being, the face of an individual, I can know that this human being also like me. The way I feel.
I partly agree with the concern that he's raised. You see, I am not here to wrestle with the professional questions of philosophy. Okay, reading or let's say taking an analytical point of view and then to read a literary text accordingly does not necessarily mean a methodological violation. I don't think so. It's not as if only continental tradition has the sole preserve on literary scholarship as matters of philosophical question. Well, that's my personal view. Which is, secondly, all of us agree, and we are well aware that none of us can settle the long-standing philosophical dichotomy, and the dichotomy in the philosophical view, what I call the mind-body problem, to be resolved through a poem. What I just tried to do, in fact, is bring to the table the immensity of the problem, and that is how I picked that essay by Nagel. That how it stirred the very roots of the problem. Now, as someone who, as all of us as university going or institutions associated with different institutions who also read, can the act of reading provide us with a certain distinct subject position which can help us get past that or try to move in that direction? That's all. I had a very modest attempt. I'm not claiming that, I'm settling the very bitter kind of debates between the analytical tradition and analytical tradition don't even consider those as valid questions. But Levinas, once again, he cuts both ways, facing the other, or his idea of responsibility, particularity. He would be kind of subscribed to by both camps, I would say, by both the camps. Anyway, that's all I have to say at this point. Thank you, nonetheless, Rajan.
Thank you, sir. George, would you like to speak? Do you have some concern?
He has already responded to me. My question was also, he has already responded to my question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Just a word of appreciation to him. A wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Thank you for participating in this.
If anyone is having any question, any query, they're most welcome. Either they wanted to.
We can also keep it open for more than questions. It's not only as if you have.
It's likely.
Please do share your, your recollections or your own impressions, your own reactions. I'm inviting you to think aloud, to kind of think as you speak, maybe. Yeah.
Anyone, like, if want to ask anything at all, they're most welcome.
Sir, I would like to think along with you. Two examples we have taken. One is about sand and then stone. You see, the reader is trying to imagine. That's how my understanding is. The reader is trying to imagine from his own self of reading the other, whereas the others have no access to the reader. Then how can we really understand the other? Whatever we may say is always limited, very subjective. Then how can we really develop a kind of a dialogical conversation? Even if I say dialogical conversation is only subjective, I mean, I only dialogue with myself through my imagination. How can this help me to understand other who is a human being if he doesn't really give me the access?
Okay.
I hope you understand my question.
Yes, I
said these two examples you have given, sand and stone, they are objects. Through the imagination, the reader is trying to dialogue within himself. Is it not? Because the others don't have any access to the reader. So the reader is trying to dialogue within himself through the imagination. So whatever he says is only from a subjective perspective of all that he can imagine about the sand and stone. But in terms of a dialogical conversation, I don't know how it can really help me to understand better, or if I have to relate to a human being. For example, a rich man talking about poverty and a poor man talking about poverty, there is a huge amount of difference. So how can you really understand?
Thank you. Shall I?
Yes. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, George, once again. You see, any piece of literary writing is not necessarily to be looked at as a user manual, right? The examples of a sand particle or particle of sand or piece of stone is, of course, an act of creation. It's not as if like somebody did talk to us, a particle of sand or a stone. What we are trying to do here is to how to even have a conversation with something as obtuse as sand, or something which does not even exist on the horizons of our imagination, like a particle of sand, something as inconsequential as a random particle of sand, right? And so I will respond to your remark in two parts. Let me also tell you that Szymborska is known to write about subjects which which are always too familiar to be noticed, right? So these objects, piece of sand or a mote of dust that is falling through and is, partially visible to us in a sudden moment or a flash of light. Not everyone takes notice of that, right? It's of no consequence. She's known to be writing about objects and these random incidents, like another poem is about a dead beetle. But the interesting aspect of her writing is that how, by taking up this radically unrelated or even entities that only come to be once they are represented, right? These are only coming to be once they are represented. So how something like a piece of stone, which ordinarily lies outside our framework of relationship, if something as radically different as that, when that is brought into the realm of conversation, for example, right? And by using that instance as an example to kind of bring to our attention or bring to light the complexities and difficulties involved in it, it possibly can tell us that what it could mean to have a conversation with a radical other. What could it mean for the self to encounter a radically different other? Or as I had mentioned in our last meeting, how it can host the otherness, how reading, what I was trying to propose, can reading host the otherness of the other, right? So it's only in this sense that I thought when we read this poem, it is telling us how or what it could mean possibly. I'm not saying that you agree with me, but I'm here just to share my views on it with you, right? I'm not here to establish my views among you. I'm not doing that. All I'm doing is to share my views with you. So to my mind, this poem, to me, it does in fact demonstrate that what it could mean, what it could seem, in fact, to host the otherness of the other as an act of reading. Thank you. That's all I'll possibly say to this.
Anyone does have any remark, query, or question? They are most welcome to ask. And if you want to say something, they're most welcome to ask. Please do not hesitate.
May I?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Sam.
Okay. So I'll begin with a very personal reflection and then take it towards my question. When I read this poem for the first time, I don't know why am I reminded of the Commonwealth scholarships and the Chevening scholarships in a way that a third world student is trying to get into the first world, and the first world denying the access. And I read it that way, and then I think that there are chains of interpretation. Like this is my personal interpretation, where I see a higher authority denying access to an entrant from a lower class or from the lower group, and then this particular interpretation is linked with other interpretations, like your interpretation, where you say that it tells about the radical otherness. And in the same way, there might be a group of interpretations which focus on otherness. So now we have created a community or a chain of interpretation which tags this poem as a poem which talks about otherness and difference and confronting difference. Now, if there is another interpretation which is different from this one, and if it is not being dismissed, then is it not somewhere or the other, since we are not denying another interpretation which is different from the general interpretation, which of course stems from multiple subjective interpretations, are we not decreasing or taking away the cognitive value of literature? Because if the poem has a message, and if we include another interpretation, it is somewhere or the other diluting the message. If the message is diluted, then is the force of literature or the cognitive purpose or the social purpose of literature discounted by allowing an interpretation which is different from a general interpretation.
Can you repeat the last bit again?
Should I repeat the question?
No, just the last fragment. Yes.
Okay. So, my thing was that from all subjective interpretations of the poem, there was one message that this poem talks about otherness. Now, if another interpretation comes in which counters this interpretation, is the purpose of writing this piece of literature discounted?
Is counted or discounted? What is it?
Discounted.
Discounted.
Lessened.
Okay.
Yes.
No, not at all. A short answer will be not at all. But more than that, I would say, why are we looking at the poem like that? The poem is not saying, maybe it is not saying anything that I am saying. I am saying this about the poem. Okay? And that's the lesson that poem is giving us. Right? My reading, my participation in this framework is what is enabling me to say this. Right? Now, does it mean that the poem can mean radically opposite and very divergent things? If that is your concern. Reading and the sense and meaning that you make, nobody is saying that it could mean anything. The poem itself is not saying, we are not saying, I'm not saying at least, that it could mean anything. Right? But if it could mean different things, it does not mean that it has been discounted. How can it be discounted? It is actually performing the multiplicity, you see, between the speaker and the stone. What is it doing? It is, in fact, telling that how futile the speaker looks like in his or her attempts, right? And this futility is, in fact, the futility of privileging this or the speaker's quote unquote innocent attempts at knowledge, right? Her innocent attempts at knowledge is not so innocent. They are flawed. They could be misplaced. They could be ethically wrong, right? And since Levinas came up, and I will also go back to what George said, following from Levinas, George is following Levinas, self is always an ethical being that is in a relationship with the other, right? So with bearing that in mind, if you work with that proposition, I don't think the poem is trying to dissociate itself from the possibility that that the speaker and the radically other stone, they cannot meaningfully inform each other. It is telling us that there could be insulations of meaning between the two, right? Yet, in the act of that contact at the edges through this encounter, they could be transforming each other, right? And this, I to my mind, is quite meaningful as someone, if someone were to think about dialogue as that kind of a participation, right? I mean, one could say, what is there to say? Of course, a stone cannot understand us, nor can I understand, if at all it has something to understand about itself, forget about us, right? But does this tell us anything about myself? That's what the poem is responding to. Now, as a specifically literary inquiry, at the level of meaning, I I would say that a poem like this would have made no sense maybe 150 years ago. In the 19th century, a poem of this kind would not even be considered a poem and would possibly be trashed. But today, this was written almost 90 years ago, if not less, 80 to 90 years ago. And it was written in a moment where we have the notion of fragmented self, we have the notion of radically different selves, and the necessity and the tension, the historical, political, historical reasons that you feel around that notion of self, which is caused great wars, devastation, etc. I mean, in a very, I would say, in a specific instance of the literary inquiry, it does not bear the burden of how meaningfully useful this poem is. No poem should bear that burden. It could exist for itself. I mean, one could read it for whatever its. I don't want to use the word worth here, but one could read it for the very act of reading it, and that in itself is quite a radical possibility. But देखिए आज के दौर में, if I could break into Hindi, the most radical thing to do is to read. There is nothing more radical, there is nothing more challenging, and there is nothing more, I would say, daunting than being tasked to read, right? So, I mean, yeah, that's all I will say.
Harshita, you can actually unmute yourself and ask the concern, whatever you have.
Yeah, sure. So, firstly, thank you so much for this session, sir. I was curious about the essay you mentioned by Thomas Nagel. So, you talked about how, by understanding the physical processes that the bat goes through, you can try and figure out what it would be like to be the bat, right? And what I gathered is from that is, in order to believe that, you also need to believe that the body and the mind are connected, that they're one. But there is also this opposing philosophy or school of thought that the body and mind are separate entities. So in that case, when you have that belief that they're two different things, how can you enter, in what way can you enter the subjective consciousness of another?
That's the impossibility that this essay is telling us about, that you cannot.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a mind-body problem, which is a traditional philosophical problem. And think about the difference between brain and mind, and between conceptual ideas and material processes, right? So you can certainly know that what does it mean to think and imagine as for us, as to what a bat is like. But we cannot know what is it for a bat to be like a bat, right? That's the kind of problem he's working with. And the implication being here, we are not, I'm not using this essay to question Nagel or why he is correct or wrong, etc. Right? But he is so wonderfully constructed that problem that it's worth reading. You can read it, and it may sound dated now. At this point, a lot of it might sound, but in those times, it was almost like breathing life into almost a settled philosophical, a settled kind of a judgment around certain questions. But this makes you think further. If that is an impossibility, then why is it? why is it that it looks like a problem? Because it is a necessity. If I'm different from you and we are sitting in a room, right? And if you don't like my particular experience, to also participate in what you take to be the general experience, then it amounts to denying my existence. Right? And we only feel disturbed when we think that this pursuit of, or the to honoring of the other, the quote unquote unknowable consciousness, is not an ethical thing to do, but it is an ethical thing to do, and it has to be. It is a necessity. It's an ethical necessity, right? That's all I will say to this. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was really enlightening. I don't know whether you want to take up more curious questions.
I don't mind. Yeah.
If there is any, please go ahead. Otherwise, we will.
I'm searching for someone who would like to just share their reading of the poem itself. It doesn't have to be anything, rooted in the very topic directly as such. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, Grishima, you can go ahead. Please unmute and ask.
Thank you, sir, for this enlightening talk. When I first read the poem, The Conversation with the Stone, for some reason I associated the stone with like a soul, like somebody's soul. I think we can't reach it. Sometimes I don't think, when we talk about how I don't think anybody can reach somebody's soul. It's like something that's so within. And I don't know, that was how I thought about it.
Okay. All right. I'm glad that you read it and you liked it.
Is there anything else someone wants to ask for?
So, may I just say, I just raise a general inquiry here? So,
Sure.
So, have you kind of formed a sense as to how reading as an enterprise could offer us that distinct subject position, which I'm trying to push for, past two sessions? Reading as in how lending oneself during the act of reading, can exemplify that intersubjective position, and hopefully, open up some new avenues for thinking beyond the absolute understandings of self and the other. So I don't know how far successful I have been over the past two sessions, but if I would really strongly urge you to keep this as also one of the concerns as you go on to listen to other speakers. And of course, you will have speakers from very different vantage points talking about it. And, maybe in a more immediate sense, it could be relatable than thinking about these very chaotic notions of reading, subjectivity, and abstract ideas as such. But keep that in mind, because I'm not talking about merely reading as sitting down with a book. Reading as a mode of being. Think about it like that. How reading can offer a distinct mode of being, which is available to oneself and others in that encounter. That's all. Thank you once again. You have been a wonderful company to me for the past two sessions. And like the last year, I have I feel quite privileged and lucky to have unloaded my own thoughts upon you. Thank you for bearing with me. And I may have sounded incomprehensible in parts.
Hello, sir.
I'm sorry about that. Hopefully, when we get to meet again.
More concerns, like this one person who is having some query. Would you like to take that?
Yes.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sethi. Unfortunately, I was unable to attend your previous lecture. But first of all, I would like to appreciate, and this was a very enlightening lecture. And as you talked about reading and this sudden comment of yours, I just want to add in one thing, that I don't know much about these things. I'm still learning. But reading for me is like an act of self-care. And it takes me to another world, I would say. And these are the simple joys of life, which I like. Reading for me is an escapism, and I totally agree with your point here. So I just wanted to add this, that I am studying psychology, like I've just completed. And you see these days people suggest other people also to read, like it's a type of self-care, and when somebody is dealing with something, so they suggest to read and grab a cup of coffee and read. So I think I am happy to hear from you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
But I must reiterate that I'm not only talking about reading in the sense that we pick up a book and read, not reading as a habit. I'm talking about reading. As I said earlier, I got that, and I'm happy that you joined in on that view. Thank you for that. But reading also, as I said, does reading as an act also offer us a certain mode of being which is intersubjective and which allows us to have a more meaningful encounter with the other, in a dialogic way. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Totally does. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I think now with that question or query, we are going to wind up our session with a short note that thank you for being here, for bridging the gap between the reading and subjectivity for us, and to make it quite simple from complex for us, to make it understandable. And it was an honor. It is an honor for us to having you over here. You were always been you're before over here. And I would again like to thank once again for this enlightening talk that you have delivered today. Thank you for your valuable time, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
All right, take care. Keep safe, everyone. Yes.